hearing concerning local law number 2, 2015, the Common Council of the City of Kingston, New York, amending Article 11, Section C and 11.5 of the Charter of the City of Kingston by adding thereto a requirement that a contract for the sale of water outside the City of Kingston must be approved by the Common Council and Mayor of the City. With that in mind, this public hearing is now called to order. Those of you who signed up, okay, on the sign-up sheet, or who have asked to speak at this point.
On the podium.
On the podium, ma'am. Has everyone had the opportunity to sign in if you care to speak today? Okay. Carl, where you going? I'm calling you. Oh, thanks, Carl. I'm sorry. Okay. With that in mind, first speaker. Sure you can. Mr. Clunan, sure.
Good morning. I'm Bill Clunan, and I'm the attorney for the Kingston Board of Water Commissioners. I just have a question for clarification from Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
One is, if you could please define for the public the purpose of this hearing. I don't mean for the referendum, but what we are doing. This is a public meeting, but I don't know if, as in the secret process, the points of issues are raised normally. When an issue is raised, they are then have to be addressed by the body and answered. I don't know if that's being done here. Maybe you can clarify that. The second thing is that this issue involves an amendment of the Charter of the City of Kingston affecting the residents of the City of Kingston. And my question to Your Honor is, are you entertaining speakers from outside of the city limits do not have a connection with the city? And if so, if you could please have them identify their interest or where they're from.
was the same as. So after today, what happens is based on your comments, and the mayor has the authority per the city charter to sign this resolution, okay, accordingly, which would then set in motion the process, okay, for a referendum, okay, with regard to the issue at hand. So with that in mind, so in response also to council's question, Mr. Kluman represents the water department. The common council now has passed this resolution. Okay, now through this hearing process, then it's incumbent upon the mayor either to sign or to veto accordingly. So that's where we're at with regard to the process of what will happen, okay, after today's public hearing. With that in mind, and also too, as the council pointed out, those who would be eligible, if you will, to vote for the referendum have to be residents of the city of Kingston. So when you speak, notwithstanding some of you do put down a Kingston address, and you can at least confirm that you are a city resident accordingly, okay? So I think that, does that answer your questions, council, with respect to why we're here, what we're going to do, and what the role is of not only the mayor, but also, okay, the citizenry here with regard to this public hearing. With that in mind, if I could then proceed and call the first individual who signed up today. Abel Garrigan, please.
Thank you, Mayor, for holding this public hearing on this resolution for the people to share their point of view.
I'm sorry, Mr. Garrigan, please provide your address for the record, please.
I'm Abel Garrigan. I live at 20 Bursman Street, Kingston, New York. Presently a citizen serving on the Kingston Water Board
Thank you, sir.
until May 2020. I speak only from my own point of view. I have no authorization to speak on behalf of the Water Board. With the break in the water main between the Saltkill Treatment Plant and the Bidding Water Reservoir on Lower Saltkill Road, I believe the Kingston Water Department cannot risk new water sales until the infrastructure improvements to the entire water delivery system is done. I want to thank the Kingston Water Department employees, Dennis Larios, Arrow Construction employees, for doing the work in the Saltkill Creek under very difficult conditions. Thank you to the town of Ulster and its water department for doing its part to keep Kingston supplied with water, a continuing powerful example of municipal cooperation. The Kingston Water Department serving Kingston with quality and service since 1895. This resolution is not needed because under the existing law, the Water Department needs Common Council approval to do bond funding, which was done in November 1953 when the Common Council approved the bond funding of $540,000 to include the $65,000 to install 4,000 feet of 12-inch cast iron pipe to supply 1 million gallons to the tract of land on which IBM intended to develop its plant. It was approved by the New York Water Power and Control Commission. The water agreement was modified in 1995 in paragraph 16. All water purchased under this is to be used by IBM or by its owners, tenants, or other occupants of the former IBM facility at Neighborhood Road in the town of Ulster for whatever purpose they deem fit and proper. It was further modified, dated May 2007. The agreement was the Kingston Water Department and Tech City. Tech City acknowledged that the City of Kingston Water Department has encumbered its water resources so as to provide water to Tech City, and further acknowledges that the City of Kingston Water Department shall be the sole and exclusive provider of water to the premises described in Liber 2761 of deeds on page 0203, recorded in the office of the Ulster County Clerk on the 18th day of February 1998 during the term of this agreement. It is important for Kingston residents that this former IBM site is available for reuse with up to 1 million gallons per day supplied through the 12-inch pipe the Kingston Water Department owns. Presently, the site is among the top 3 real estate taxpayers to the Kingston City School District. The Water Department presently is working on a capital improvement plan of between $18 and $20 million of mandated improvements to Cooper's Lake, the water treatment plant, and additional systems improvements. The need to develop a long-term capital repair improvement over the next couple of decades will require multiples of $20 million in what is needed to be done, all of which will need to have some level of bonding authorization by the Common Council and the Mayor. To our friends and neighbors in Woodstock who have water rights dating back to 1929, of which every time we consider how much water we have, we reserve an amount in recognition of that right. Something in the order of 200, 250,000 gallons a day is always reserved. I urge the town of Woodstock to join NIWARN. NIWARN is the New York Water Wastewater Agency Response Network. This organization was formed after Katrina to facilitate the cooperation between communities when a disaster hits, much like the mutual aid between communities' fire departments. In fact, the Water Superintendent Judy Hansen is the chair of the this statewide organization. I also think the Hamlet of Old Hurley and the Vogue Water Company should consider joining NIWARN. The towns of Esopus and Ulster are already members of NIWARN, and I think it's proved very helpful to have that type of community. It's a powerful example of community cooperation to have that ability. And it's not only talking just about water. They would be able to share men or equipment if they needed on a couple of days or a couple hours notice. Because sometimes it's not just the water. You know, they need a fire hydrant or something like that, and they can't find one. Somebody else might have one handy in the local area. So they can cooperate with each other, and they'd be responsible for paying whatever the costs were between themselves. Being the son of an Irish politician, I believe the Kingston voters will see this resolution as an election year effort to get some credit for fixing something that is not broken on a century-old separation of authority and responsibility for the Kingston Water Board, to operate the Water Department and the Common Council and Mayor to authorize any needed bond funding for the Kingston Water Department as established by New York State Legislature. This is my point of view. I will be voting against the resolution and urge the voters of Kingston to vote against it because it is so broadly written and lacks clarity that I am concerned this creates confusion and conflict with existing Kingston Water Department agreements dating back over 100 years. It may lead to unneeded lawsuits. Since the Common Council already has control over bonding authority for the Kingston Water Department, this resolution is at least redundant authority. I thank you for the time to share my point of view.
Thank you. Mr. G. Bruder, please.
Yes, my name is Gene Gruner. My wife Peg and I reside at 183 Pearl Street in the city of Kingston. As we all know, water is a very precious and valuable asset. I became acutely aware of that when my wife was the director of the department's water lab in Sawkill for 3 years, dated from 1977 to 80. On the basis of that experience, I also became aware of the fact that the water board was established because of the valuable nature of water. Hence, they created a board to keep it out of the hands of transient two-year politicians looking to make decisions for political gain. And I supported that decision over 100 years ago, and I support it today, and therefore I am against the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruder. Clark Rickers.
My name is Clark Richters, and I reside in the city of Kingston at 3 Garrigan Drive, and I'm proud to say, and I support giving the council, the Common Council, the power to determine of the water sale. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richter. Forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Rittenhouse? Rittenhouse?
First of all, I wish somebody had told us about the sign-up sheet because, and saved us time in this meeting. Secondly, the scheduling of this meeting, I object to. If this is for public comment, it should be when people aren't having to go to work. The mayor is on the board of the water board, isn't he? Aren't you?
Yes.
Okay. And did you represent the city of Kingston in the water board as far as selling the water?
I haven't had the opportunity to do that because the issue became moot. Okay, with respect to Niagara Bottles, to answer your question would be, as a member of the Water Commissioners, ma'am, the answer is yes. But have I had the opportunity to do that? No.
Okay, because what I object to the idea that this water board doesn't consult the city of Kingston and that they can operate and do what they want other than, without our input. And therefore, I'm not sure how this resolution, I'm not an attorney, and of course all this attorneys with all this gobbledygook is, very confusing. Sometimes I think it's intentional. But I think that the city of Kingston should have a say in the water. And if the mayor doesn't have the right to get the input from the residents that he represents, then I think that the Common Council has to take this issue up. I also want to throw in another little comment. If the school district in the town of Ulster, if they pay to Kingston schools, if they are using Kingston water, and there's all this cooperation, when are we going to stop with all these silly fiefdoms and become one big city?
Actually, ma'am, in response to that, as the public understands, you raised the question of what's called annexation under general municipal law. That issue was addressed, okay, when my late brother was mayor. As a matter of fact, he put together a group to try to see whether or not the city of Kingston would annex the town of Ulster. It's a fairly lengthy, complicated process involving both governments of the municipalities affected with a referendum and so forth. So with all due respect, therein lies why that hasn't happened. If in fact it did, the city of Kingston would be one of the top 5 or 6, I think it's within the top 10, considered small metro areas, if you will, all right, in New York State. That's a discussion we can have separate. It's not relevant to today's proceeding, which is to try to give yourself an opportunity to weigh in about whether the council should have this be a charter change to do exactly what you would like to see done.
And my comment is that yes, I think the council should have.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, Council. Yeah, Ms. Rittenhouse is at 46 Lincoln Avenue, Kingston, New York. Thank you. Red Will.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brad Will, I reside at 140 Main Street. I have already voted my support for this referendum to take place. And looking back in September, late September of 2014, it was first the proposed Niagara Bottling Company vaulted into the public eye after months of negotiations that weren't, so disclosed, at least dating back to April of 2014. So that really caught everybody's attention, obviously, and the Common Council reacted, and accordingly, I believe, to do everything we could to involve the City of Kingston and request that the DEC become the lead agency in this massive request for 1.75 million gallons of water use per day outside of the city. My colleagues, Mary Ann Mills, Bill Carey, We also voted unanimously for this local law. So really, I think everybody in Kingston is involved in this. Every time we turn our tap water on, every time we flush our toilets, every time we hook up our hose bib to water our gardens, every time the Kingston firefighters plug into a hydrant, that's our water. And for those who are concerned that this is politicized, I would just say we're a long ways away from the 1890s. Plastic water bottling was not envisioned then, and there were probably very good reasons to put a firewall up then. We live in different times now. The Common Council votes on bonding for a multitude of projects every year, dozens of projects, and we never hear that those are politicized. They are debated, discussed in committee, and voted on the floor. Up or down, we have a vote. I think, similarly, questions of outside water sales are of a prime interest to all Kingston citizens, residents, businesses, the future economic and environmental health and welfare and safety of Kingston, our future growth. We want to preserve this water. I don't, however you want to characterize 1.75 million gallons per day as being surplus or excess, I think we'd like to hold on to some of that. And further, if the Common Council is given this ability to vote on a case-by-case basis on outside of the city limit water sales, that's not to say we're going to be voting down. It's going to be, we evaluate every one and look at what our capacity is and vote accordingly. Now, Abel Garrigan has left the room. I wanted to address his point on IBM. There was strict language in those water rights given to IBM in Tech City, before it was called Tech City, of course. And those 1 billion gallons per day were for IBM as long as they were in that facility. Now, if another company came in there and wanted to take over that space and build businesses and thrive, of course we would approve water for that building. Why wouldn't we? It's everybody's best interest, especially given that that's an existing facility rather than the new 450,000 square foot building built along the banks of the Esopus, which, by the way, the Niagara Bottling Company proposed to discharge over 350,000 gallons into every day. So I like to think that we are being stewards of Kingston's water, that these are new times, and that we are not looking to politicize this issue one iota. This is about making smart decisions for infrastructure at every level, for the roads, for what's under the roads, water, sewer, what's above, the lighting, power, broadband. All of these things are decisions that we make every day and every month in these chambers and in your office, Mr. Mayor. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And I just also want to echo Lynn's concern, Lynn Rittenhouse's concern about the timing of a public hearing. I would like to see these events happen in the evening. I think we get a much better attendance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. David Brunner.
Good morning. My name is David Bruner. I reside at 50 Hudson Street in Kingston, and I'm a regular voter. First off, I'd like to say I don't think so well with my feet, or with my feet in this case. I'd like to second everything that Will Brad said, or Brad Will said, and highlight some. Everything they said was right on score. I want to repeat myself that this is the worst time that you could do this. It makes me wonder how strong your intention is about this resolution, this local law. And I'd like you to schedule another one, not just complain about this one. please do that if you can within the next, we need to have it before the next voting period, so that would be the best way to go from here. Also, I've heard it said that the establishment of the water boards in the current fashion was a myth. And then we had a gentleman just up here, Gruner, I believe, I'm not sure if I have his name right, who did elaborate a lot more. And it was even worse than that. It was kind of like an era of the land barons and political corruption. It was pretty, it was very, very much the way business was done back then. And so it was kind of a desperate measure that protected natural resources like this. Public Works Department projects, they're all kind of the same kind of effort. Here, when we've got corporations who are now people and they vote with the massive funds, we're kind of in a similar situation. The one different thing is that we've got a lot of people who are paying attention to things. People who are aware of the consequences. And in a way, we were lucky it was Niagara and not Pepsi or Nestle who was after our water. They could be a lot more ruthless, and they take free rein with the water. So I would say the only thing that could be a better solution to this resolution, or than this resolution, would be to create a law that forbids water sales or profit outside city limits. And, recognizing that politics is a fickle thing. We've been lucky. We've got fairly enlightened people in politics right now. We've got unanimous support for this resolution in the council. But that's not always going to be the case. So maybe the best, the most important person in this process has been KingstonCitizens.org and Rebecca Martin, who really energized the community to get involved. Not to say that they weren't already. This is the difference between this era of corporations being people and back in the turn of the century, the last century, when there was so much corruption in the public. And that is that we've got this huge issue ahead of us where things are not going to be happening as they have been. Constant growth is going to stop. Climate change is really forcing everybody to take a second look. So once again, I want to thank you and for doing this, and hope that you'll have another meeting in the evening so much more people can come. And also, I do want to say I really think that was a good thing that they did back in the turn of the century, to put the water out of political reach. And I believe that the water board and the director had our best interests in mind. And I respectfully disagree and think that we need to do it a different way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Annabelle Ginos.
Good morning, Mayor Gallo. I'm Annabelle Genoa, and I am a resident of the town of Woodstock. I would like to very respectfully submit comments on behalf of the Woodstock Land Conservancy. So the Woodstock Land Conservancy is a non-profit organization committed to the protection and preservation of the open lands, forests, wetlands, scenic areas, and historic sites in Woodstock and the surrounding area. The Woodstock Land Conservancy respectfully supports the passage of this referendum that will allow the people of Kingston to vote whether or not to include the City of Kingston's Common Council and Mayor in the decision-making process for any water sales outside of the city's corporate boundaries. We hope this law might be one step in helping to ensure the future protection of both the City of Kingston and Woodstock shared water rights, as well as the integrity of the Mink Hollow, Beaverville watershed, and Cooper Lake Reservoir. In the wake of the Niagara bottling proposal, and having entered an unprecedented era in human and climate history, we are particularly grateful that the City of Kingston elected representatives have taken swift action on such a fundamental issue. We look forward to future partnerships with Kingston to see our region prosper through sustainable economic development grounded in sound, science-based stewardship and management of our communities as well as our region's precious natural resources. Thank you.
Tom Hackett.
Thank you, Mayor Gallo. I've heard it said in a few cases that the current arrangement was set up in order to keep the water issues above politics. Whether we like it or not, and whether politics are messy, politics is the way that the will of the people is expressed in a democracy. I think it was a nice idea to try to elevate the water department above politics so that they don't have to come to the people to decide whether to put a water main on the left side of the street or the right side of the street. But I think when it comes to issues of this importance, the will of the people needs to surface through the political process. And so I will look forward to voting in favor of the referendum. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. 70 Wall Street, Kingston. Jennifer Schwartzberg.
Thank you, Jennifer Schwartzberg, 35 Holland Street, Kingston, New York. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I just want to point out a few things. First of all, I would like to add to what Tom said, to say that I think it's very important that we recognize that politics is about the will of the people, that all of our political representatives in Kingston should be listening to those voices. And I think it's sad to suggest that anyone, including the unanimous vote of the Common Council in the last meeting to move toward this referendum, that any one of them would do this for political gain. I also just want to mention that in my statement in that last Common Council meeting, I referred to the scores of communities around the world that are not only taking back their municipal water supply from privatization, but are also making efforts to remunicipalize in a way that it really increases the transparency of the public and elected officials and appointed officials in the process of managing water, and they have done so very successfully. We can learn a great deal from those best practices, and they are available to us. In fact, the City of San Antonio, just a few weeks ago, decided to vote unanimously against Niagara Water Bottling Company when it came to that drought-stricken area, partly because they understood what we went through here. And I think it's very important that we recognize that the voice of the people is a significant part of this process. So in terms of speaking of the voice of the people, I just want to conclude with a bit of information for you about Kingston Citizens' role in helping raise the voice of the people. And in chronological order, 1,587 people signed to prevent grant funding for Niagara. 1,823 people signed to prevent tax abatements for Niagara from Startup New York. 83 people signed to increase transparency in water board selection procedures. And 131 people signed this Water Powers referendum. I think that speaks volumes to what we're doing here today, and I thank you very much for supporting this and moving toward the referendum in November, which I'm sure will make the voice of the public heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Renee and Nora, I always get your name, I apologize. I can't even read. Boozy, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Well,
I haven't got it right yet.
so if I may, it's Renaud Fuzziak.
There, thank you, Renee. I get that right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am a resident of the town of Ulster. I live at 142 Van Kuren Highway. Perhaps I don't have the right to comment on the proposed referendum, but in a way I feel that I do. Since my daughter has recently purchased a house in the city of Kingston, and she will be part of the Kingston fabric. I understand that the water board was created in 1895, and the conditions and circumstances that existed at that time perhaps justified the structure of that board the way it was configured at that time. As you know, time has gone on. Many things have changed. Technology has changed. Social requirements have changed. Perhaps the term conservation and preservation were not even part of the vernacular in 1895. Certainly that is the case today. The thing that really got my attention is that it was proposed that 30% of our water capacity was going to be allocated to an outside company for profit and for gain. In 1895, that was not on the horizon. It was not anticipated that 30% of the water may have been allocated to an entity for profit. I strongly support the referendum and having the public have a say in how the water is going to be used and distributed. It is uncomfortable to me to have an appointed board really control our resources. I believe that our community today is more astute relative to the definition and requirement of conservation, and they should have a right to say how that water is going to be allocated and how it's going to be used. I would think that those people who would have an opportunity to comment on whether they wanted 30% of the water given away or sold for a number of reasons, I think that the answer certainly would be no. And I think that the constituency should be given an opportunity to have a voice in this very important matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kevin McAvoy.
Good morning. I'm Kevin McAvoy. I reside at 254 Delaware Avenue. That's in Warren 8, Pontockie. I'm here to speak today in favor of the local law and council change, but charter change rather, I'm sorry. And I want to thank the water commissioners and you, Mr. Mayor, for all your hard work. I served on several much unanimous against it, so that should be pointed out. Regarding separation of powers, I believe this has been touched on by several other speakers, but an independent water board was put into effect due to the state political affairs in the late 19th century, which is no longer current. I'm going to conclude my comments with, as a community, we need to protect our natural resources and our water supply, which I believe is held in public trust and needs to remain held in public trust. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Okay, I believe all of those who've signed up have spoken, and we have the information is now been recorded. And as I stated at the beginning of this public hearing, now what has to be done is that the mayor has to sign this resolution, which will in effect, facilitate the matter, for a public referendum. Mr. Clunin, sir? Yes, sir.
And Your Honor, I am William Clunin. I'm the attorney for the Board of Water Commissioners. I've been associated with the Water Board for over 35, perhaps going on 40 years now. As this group is aware, my father was superintendent for some 47 years, and the formation of the Kingston Water Department was done with the auspices of another family member, John Clunin, back in the 1870s. I do have some history about this, and I am very familiar with the operation of the Water Board and its operation and distribution of water outside the city limits. I just want to bring a couple things to mind. A number of speakers have mentioned about the Niagara issue. I have to tell you, that really brings to my mind as an attorney one of the issues that should be before Your Honor and the Common Council here. There was a group that came forward who was opposed to the use of the water by Niagara Bottling Company. One speaker said it was a for-profit company. There are very few companies somewhere that are not for-profit. They use water. IBM was obviously a profit company. They were also using up to 1 million gallons of water a day. But the problem is that a group of people were able to come forward, and this is what I foresee as an attorney and as a citizen. A small group of people were able to raise an issue that they were opposed to, that issue being the use of water for the manufacture of sale of water in plastic bottles. Specifically, the objection was to plastic. And that may be a very good and worthy cause. Unfortunately, if it's used as a decision-making process as to whether or not water should be sold to the consumer, whether they be within or without the city of Kingston, I see that as being a very dangerous political issue. If a user came into the town of Olson and decided on that site, which we have the exclusive obligation to supply water to, if they want to build a hospital, do you think there would be an objection to a hospital being located on that site? Probably not. However, if that hospital were to do things such as performing procedures such as abortions or whatever, there is a very militant group that say, we don't want that use on that property. So now we have the political process involved as to how the water is to be used. Suppose it's a farmer. We do supply water to farms. And I've asked a number of farmers around here, and remarkably enough, a number of bottled milk is supplied in plastic bottles. But we don't see the hue and cry of plastic bottles for milk use. Now, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing for the use of the waters, but the water board, as it is formed, does not have the authority. It's not granted the authority by law. And I tell you that some people say, well, the law hasn't changed because it's old. The Constitution's been working pretty well for a couple of years. And most of our statutes have. But if we start making decisions as to how a person is going to be using things, which is a political decision, and that's what we come before this chamber, I think that could cause a real danger in the future. Second thing that people have to acknowledge that there were contracts in effect at which we're obliged to follow. We don't have a choice. And in the agreement that was sold water to the IBM premises, in that contract, as approved approved by the state, it's approved by the legislature, it's approved by this common council, it's approved by the water board. You are, and the city is specifically prohibited from making decisions of how the water is to be used on that property. It's whatever use the tenant decides. So that's a very important thing that this group has to acknowledge, but they will not. Lastly, the thing that's really, not even lastly, coming up to this, the water board members that I've spoken to and the superintendent are very upset about the reaction that people have had with respect to water commissioners, thinking that they have sold their rights to various conservancy more than anyone knows. They had never reached a decision to sell water to Niagara at that site. They were still doing their process investigation as to the first issue as whether or not there was an adequacy of supply. Our liaison from the Common Council, who sits in our meetings, has gotten up here again over and over and said that we were going to sell 1.75 million gallons of water per day to Niagara. Fabrication that never was true. He is aware of it. The Common Council members should be aware of it. There was never an agreement to sell, never even a request for 1.75 million gallons of water per day at that facility. They said there would be days when they could use up to that amount on an occasion. But we were not giving away or selling 1.75 million gallons of water. These things have to be clarified. One of the speakers here said that he was opposed to the sale of water outside the city limits for profit. You can't make that decision how a person is going to be using or not using his water. If you start doing outside the city, let's do it within the city. I don't like my neighbor, I don't like he's going to put a car wash in. And I don't like to have a car wash. So we're going to vote on this as a political group and make that decision. It creates another layer that a developer in this area has to go through and face. Right now, a developer, if he wanted to locate the town of Ulster or the town of Port Huron or whatever, they would have to come not only to that municipality, go to the secret process, and now they're going to go through another layer of the rest of the city of Kingston. There is no way that the city water board is allowed to sell water, its water, town of Woodstock's water, that's going to cause any jeopardy to the users of the city of Kingston. As I explained to this council when I first came in here, I've drawn the contracts, I'm familiar with the law, and the law is not a secret. And what it says is if there's a sale of water by the city of Kingston to someone outside of its corporate limits, and in any way endangers the supply of water to the residents of the city of Kingston, and including the residents of the town of Woodstock, because they're part of that agreement, that tap must be turned off. If we had a drought, the water has to be turned off. It happened at IBM. I remember that. When we had a drought, IBM was a huge facility. We went out to IBM and said, listen, we're having a water shortage. That tap was turned almost in half for IBM in order to conserve water for people in the city of Kingston. There are protections. There are guarantees. If the issue is one of Niagara as to what people are going to be used for, I'd say that is a totally inappropriate issue with respect to this referendum. If it's a question of supply, I want you to know, and I want the members of the Common Council to know, and I want these people to know that there are adequate preservation standards in effect right now to prevent any jeopardy of the sale of water outside the city of Kingston to users. So I want to bring that to the mayor's attention. I want to bring it to the public's attention. I believe that this referendum, I believe that it's an issue that the people should be brought, that should be brought to the people as a referendum. I think the people should speak on it, but I think they should really carefully think about what they're asking this council to do. Two people have said something here. One was Mr. Garrett said it's worked for many years, it hasn't broken. Why change it? Second was a comment that was made recently, is the water board has been working all these years, it's worked very well. It is transparent. We have the mayor, we have a member of the Common Council on that, our board meetings are open. But if they're having problems running other issues in the city of Kingston, we're working pretty well all these years. Don't mess with the water department. That's my opinion, and that of the water issues. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Clune. I want to first of all say the following, because we're going notwithstanding perhaps the transparency of the water department and commissioners, there's ineffective communication. And the concern is that those who are here today are here today because they have legitimate concerns about capacity, about demand, about the infrastructure, and whether or not the board is transparent or not, because I can state publicly, I didn't know about, the matter of Magna Filing until a reporter called me, last year. And I'm on the board. And I was never sent an agenda, I'll state this publicly, where that issue was discussed. Otherwise, I would have attended. So, with all due respect, I agree with counsel, and I acknowledge, your concerns about politicizing the matter. I acknowledge your concerns that it could affect our contracts, that are binding, with the municipality, the water department, and those who benefit. But I can state this publicly today, I will be signing this resolution because you've concluded, Mr. Clooney, the public deserves to weigh into this, as we've heard here today, that the structure of the water department was created in the late 1800s, obviously in response to the vagaries of a very politically corrupt local community, and there are concerns about same. And remember, the reservoir has a real deep, dark history about a couple of local families who made a lot of money, flooding that area, and the tanneries and the lumber yards were done, and New York City got the water. So I think all that put in perspective lends itself to today's hearing, an opportunity of the citizenry, to weigh in and request that my office, the executive branch of government, continue with what the resolution was unanimously adopted. And I think the reason why the council did what they did, in my opinion, is to respond to everything that we're talking about here today. The concern about effective communication, the concern that the process is transparent, and the concern that people are engaged. Because there's a good point that even though notwithstanding the mayor is on the board, how much does that do with respect to actually representing the interests of the community, the city? So for all those reasons, I want to assure the public, and I agree with what you stated, but then I have to reconcile it with the public's concerns and the issues that have surfaced during this time, and acknowledge that the public has a right, at least to consider, this resolution, on the ballot, in the form of a referendum. So with that in mind, I will be signing this resolution. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I appreciate your remarks, and I look forward to working with you all in this issue going forward. Thank you. Public hearing is now concluded.